Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. I think we've got 2 or 3 more before we take a break for the summer. We've got a special guest next week from America, but we'll wait for next week to introduce them. Now, this evening, I'm going to be spending the hour with you on my own, so there'll be lots of opportunity to respond to comments and questions, so do fire those in. I was very happy to do that. We did have someone lined up for the live stream, but communication seems to have broken down. Brian's there. Brian, it was a bit too late, though, by the time you got back, and we hadn't had a chance to discuss topics, so I'm afraid we're not going to be able to do that absolutely at the last minute. Maybe just towards the end of this, I'll put the link into Facebook, and you could come on maybe later on, but we shall see. I will start off with some other things first. So Brian, stay around. We'll maybe bring you on later. Right, family party news. First of all, tomorrow evening we have our protest in Glasgow, as I'm sure you probably know, outside the offices of Education Scotland, and we're there objecting to their indoctrination and corruption of children through sex, gender, sexuality education. That's featuring Glasgow cabbie Niall Fraser, who's a bit of a sort of social media figure, Dr. Stuart Wayton from Abertay University, Katrina Taylor, who is a retired head teacher, Pastor Arthur O'Malley from Eastgate Church in Elderslie, and myself. It's not a family party event. It's just a coming together of people sharing those opinions. I think we're going to have quite a decent crowd. In fact, I think we might have a big crowd. Actually, let's see. Hopefully we'll get a great crowd. Do come along. Make your voice heard. And we're inviting people to bring a teddy. That's not compulsory, but if you can bring a teddy, that would be great. The idea is that teddies illustrate childhood innocence, and it just reminds people of the developmental stage of young children. Whereas we want children to be playing with teddies, Education Scotland want to be playing with their gender identity and pronouns. So we thought teddies would be quite an appropriate symbol. We might get some media-friendly images with people holding teddies as well. So that is tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. in Glasgow, 58 Robertson Street. It's just by the central station, 58 Robertson Street. The buildings are not labelled Education Scotland. Their offices are in the office building, but there's none of their branding on the front of it. So if you're there early and you're thinking of the wrong place, you're not. Looking forward to that. Do come along. On Thursday at 2 o'clock in Edinburgh, we're having a gathering outside the Scottish Parliament. It's a bit of an impromptu thing. I mean, there's been so much attention at the moment on the pro-life issue, so much demonization and attempts to suppress the pro-life voice. We thought we'd just go along and put our head above the parapet, put down a marker saying, we're still here, we're not going away. So we'll be going to the Parliament with our new pro-life flags that our Deputy Leader, Phil Holden, has ordered for us. We've got lots of those and a couple of placards. So do come along and join us at 2 o'clock Thursday in front of the Scottish Parliament building. We'll be there for about an hour. I think it's actually the last day that the Parliament is sitting. So maybe some of the MSPs will be coming out, leaving for the summer, and maybe we'll catch some of them. But as I say, the least is we're going to show that we're not being pushed underground, despite all of the attacks and vitriol that's been directed in the direction of the sort of pro-lifers recently. So that's Wednesday, 7 o'clock in Glasgow, Thursday, 2 o'clock in Edinburgh. We would love to see you. Right. Hello, Fraser. Right, been following your story online. So, all the best wishes with your health challenge at the moment. Right, moving on. Well, there's been the Indie Ref announcement from Nicola Sturgeon, which, that's sort of not really our department. Some Scottish Family Party members would vote one way in an independence referendum. Some would vote the other way. But as a party, we are neutral. We have criteria in our policies about whether or not we would support an independence referendum. And we're going to update those and make those a bit more specific. But basically, I think our policy will be, if there's been a clear majority in opinion polls for X number of years, then we would agree. We wouldn't oppose an independence referendum. That would be our policy. But at the moment, that is not the case. So if we had MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, they would not be supporting an independence referendum currently. But Nicola Sturgeon has declared unilaterally that she might decide that the next general election is actually an independence referendum. Now, how she thinks she can decide that, I really do not know. But that will place the family party in a unique position. Because if the campaign, therefore, becomes just utterly dominated by the Constitution, we will have a very unique position. We will have all of our positive policies, very important policies, of course, and we'll also be the only party saying that there are actually some things more important than the Constitution. So that might play in our favour if that's the policy in the general election. Just to let you know, our hope for the general election, our goal is to have a candidate in every constituency in Scotland, which is very, very ambitious for us. It's not hugely ambitious in terms of people power. I think getting 59 candidates, we can do that. We've got the people. The challenge would be the money. So we would need some significant donations, some significant other sources of income if we're going to be able to do that. But that is our goal. That's what we are working towards. And our other little goal for that election is to beat Alba as well. So they will become party number 7. We will become party number 6. And having overtaken those, we will be the biggest party outside the Scottish Parliament. And that's the step towards being the smallest party inside the Scottish Parliament. Anyway, that's our plans with that. I mean, the other SNP news, this business with Patrick Grady, with his, conviction is not the word, but being found to have engaged in made inappropriate sexual advances to a member of staff. Okay, I've talked about all that already. But it's interesting watching Ian Blackford trying to defend it. And it was just asked straightforward questions. Basically, is this person fit to be an MP? And he just would not answer. He would not answer. He would only answer with, we followed our procedure. This is our procedure. This is what we do. These are the rules. This is my job. He would not answer the question, do you think he's suitable to be an MP? Now, that is the critical question, isn't it? He either should say, well, I think what he did was wrong, but actually, I don't think it was so serious that he should be fired or he should be chopped as an MP by the SNP. He could have said that. That would be a reasonable answer. To be honest, I wouldn't disagree with him too strongly about that. I think I probably would disagree with him. But what Patrick Grady did was not anywhere near as bad as it might have been. Let's put it that way. If you look at Angus MacNeil, the Western Isles MP, by some bizarre phenomenon, I do not understand how he's still the Western Isles MP, having had sort of 2 drunk schoolgirls in his hotel bedroom engaged in, the details are not entirely clear. But anyway, that was reported in the newspapers quite a few years ago now. I'm sure if that happened now, he would have been fired immediately, without question. So Patrick Grady, should he go or not? I'd be inclined to say he should. But what really frustrates me is the way the SNP will refuse to get to grips with the heart of the question. It's like when I write to them and say, you've got a child sexuality advocate in charge of sex education, and they reply saying he was appointed by a committee. And Ian Blackford, you say, you've got someone who's made unwanted sexual advances to someone, a sex pest, you could describe him. Is he fit to be an MP? We've followed the proper procedure. They will not answer a moral question. They will not get to the heart of an issue. They just respond with procedural management speak. It drives me crazy. It really irritates me when people refuse to get to the actual issue at the heart of the matter. But that's the SNP. Anyway, moving on, what else have we had in the... Right, that's a little question for it all. Can someone resident in England stand in a Scottish election? Yes, they can. They certainly can. Yes, you can even stand in a Scottish election if you live outside the UK, so long as you are a citizen. I'm not even sure you have to be a citizen for Scottish elections. You don't even need to be a citizen, but you need to have some sort of residence in the UK in order to stand. Right, let's move on. Roe versus Wade. I mean, that's been the big news, hasn't it? You'll all have seen response from around the world. Politicians queuing up to say how awful it is, how horrific it is, that some babies will be saved in America. And the women who want to have abortions will have to drive a certain distance, a few hours to get to another state to have an abortion. And they're talking about it in the most hysterical terms. Now, of course, in Scotland, we had our Roe versus Wade moment in 2017. Do you remember it? Do you remember Nicola Sturgeon being horrified by it? Do you remember Boris Johnson being horrified by it? No, I don't either. No one cared at all. It was a bit of a non-event, really. But in 2017, in the United Kingdom, abortion was devolved to Scotland. It had previously been a reserved issue, so the Westminster government would have decided the law, but it was devolved to Scotland. So Scotland can decide now. That's exactly what's happened in America. Abortion has been devolved, if you like, to states instead of the decision being made at the federal level. So exactly the same thing happened. So what people are not objecting to in America, they're not objecting to the fact that decision-making power has been devolved. They're objecting to the fact that some states are going to make what they see as the wrong decision with it. Now, I've had a look on social media. I checked through MSPs, the ones who I thought maybe would have made some positive comment about it. And when I checked, I couldn't see any positive comment about the saving of babies' lives in America from any MSP at all. Subsequently, it was in the newspaper that someone emailed or wrote to John Mason asking him what he thought. And John Mason basically said it was a good thing. Now, John Mason is the most outspoken, brave MSP by a country mile, and he'll stand up on these issues, say what he thinks. I mean, I think on a lot of issues, I would probably say quite a lot more than him. But he says what he thinks, and the flack he gets from within the SNP is savage. I mean, his colleagues turn on him in a pretty unpleasant way. I mean, I think he's coming up to retirement, probably. But whether he'll survive this term until he retires, I really don't know. Because within the SNP, it's quite clever what they do, actually. If you hear what they say, they'll always say, it's okay for him to have these opinions, by which they mean, if you're a Catholic or if you're pro-life, do keep voting for us, even though we absolutely hate what you believe and think it's utterly evil and despicable. Even though that's what we believe about you and your beliefs, do keep voting for us. We're okay with you believing it. But if you even hint that might affect our policy, then wow, we will just turn on you savagely. And I mean, to be honest, who's been fooled in this game? The people have been fooled. The people who are keeping voting for the SNP because they think, oh, they'll let John Mason stay in. But the SNP in general despises his pro-life views. They treat him with utter contempt because of his pro-life views. Murdo Fraser, maybe the most conservative MSP. I know that's not a very high standard, but he is maybe the most conservative MSP. As far as I can see, he has had nothing to say on the issue at all. Zero. Now, Murdo Fraser, he'll talk about the trans issue because that's sort of open season a little bit. You can talk about that. It's just about in the Overton window, if you like. The media will publish you on that. When it comes to defending unborn children, Murdo Fraser and every other MSP, apart from John Mason, they seem to have decided that's not really an issue they want to touch for whatever reason. So whatever that reason is, it's more important than standing up for the lives of unborn children. Right, one more thing from the Conservative Party on this. On the day that the Roe v. Wade decision was announced, Sandesh Gulane, I don't know if I pronounced that right, but he's the Scottish Conservative MSP health spokesman. He tweeted that he wanted facilities for late abortions to be made available in Scotland. Currently, some women having particularly late-term abortions, I think it's maybe 18 to 24 weeks, have to go to England to have that procedure performed. He was saying this should be performed in Scotland. So I retweeted it saying, Conservative health spokesman wants babies to be torn limb from limb in Scotland, which is absolutely, literally, precisely the truth. Because that's what it involves, an abortion at those stages. The baby is torn limb from limb and extracted. So I put that on Twitter. Next thing I know, blocked. He's blocked the family party on Twitter. So he obviously wasn't very pleased with just a straightforward pointing out of what he was commending. And the last thing just to say on Roe versus Wade, I mean, sometimes people say to me, they say, can you not get those gender critical feminists on board? Maybe J.K. Rowling. Would she like the family party because she doesn't agree with the trans stuff? And all these other, feminist groups, these women's groups who are against the trans stuff. could we not get them on board? Could we not get them along to the conference? Could we not do a joint event? And I'll often say, these people are not on our wavelength. Apart from on this one issue, they're a million miles away from us, and they would probably think we were, very bad people and whatever. I mean, J.K. Rowling was tweeting today, about how appalling it is, the Roe versus Wade, women's right to bodily autonomy, etc. Now, I'm all for making alliances with people and working together and bringing people on board. But we've got to be realistic. The gender critical feminists, as they're called, generally, most of them vehemently oppose almost all that we stand for, apart from a little bit about transgenderism. They are not social conservatives at all. They are not pro-family in our sense at all. They are often anti-marriage, and they're also anti-life. So we need to be realistic that these are not sort of friends we haven't met yet. Okay, these are not potential allies. These are people who are always going to be politically opposing us. So it doesn't mean we can't work together and be respectful or whatever and agree with each other and retweet each other or whatever on particular items. But I think we've got to be realistic that is the big picture. Now, someone could say there, oh, here's a good tactic for you. Why don't you drop the pro-life stance, and then maybe you could get all of them on board? Well, we'd have to drop like 80% of our policies. But it's just a matter of principle. I was talking to someone else recently as well. They're talking about tactics about how parties could work together. And as I say, the pro-life issue, it's not open to practical discussion. Doesn't matter what deals available. It doesn't matter what advantage there could be in dropping that policy. I don't believe there would be, by the way. But it doesn't matter what there would be. It's just a matter of principle. Just a matter of principle. So that's not going anywhere. Right, some good comments there on the pro-life issue, but that's okay. Just moving on to another aspect of the pro-life issue, the buffer zone debate has been to the fore again. Nicola Sturgeon has taken the reins as basically they're trying to placate the campaigners who want buffer zones to prevent prayer vigils and other sorts of protest demonstration activity around abortion clinics. Now, the SNP are desperate to do what these campaigners want because they're absolutely on their wavelength and they're their supporters. But the reason they haven't done it is because they're not sure if it would hold up legally. So they've held a summit. Nicola Sturgeon pulled together various people involved, including the humanists. Humanists? I mean, what expertise do humanists bring to this debate? I'm not quite sure. Anyway, so it's brought in all these people, and they've said that the government's going to support councils to introduce bylaws to implement buffer zones. Councils previously have said, well, we can't because our legal advice is that it won't stand up in court. So I'm not sure they've actually achieved anything, but they're trying to look as if they have achieved something. Now, it's actually my wife, Mary, organizes the 40 Days for Life campaign vigil in Edinburgh. Normally it's 2, 3, 4 people at once stand on the other side of the road of the clinic with a couple of placards praying. They don't approach anyone. They don't try and give any literature out. They'll talk to people who come and talk to them. They get appalling abuse, quite concerning abuse. And I use the word advise there. I don't just mean people saying things a little bit unpleasant. I mean, real abuse, actions as well as words. But it's fascinating. That relatively low-key, simple event just generates hysteria in the establishment to the point that Nicola Sturgeon is hosting a top-level meeting to try and stop 40 Days for Life. My wife's little vigil, getting a couple, 3, 4, 5 people there holding placards. That's like a big priority for the government. They're just going hysterical over the issue. Is that a good thing? Oh, yes. Yeah, that's a great thing. The more hysterical they get, the better, because that's just helping to push the issue up the agenda. For decades, abortion hasn't been on the political agenda in Britain, but times are changing, partly because of international influence, partly because the pro-life movement in Britain is getting stronger and stronger and bolder, and partly because the people who oppose it are getting more and more hysterical, and they'll start generating publicity on our behalf. So do join us on Thursday at the Parliament at 2:00 if you can. Right, just one last thing on this topic. I was listening to an interview on The Nine, BBC The Nine, about buffer zones last night. They had someone from Alliance for Democracy and Freedom, which is a pan-European sort of freedom of speech organization. They're very, very good, very professional. Do look them up online. I've met a couple of people from it. They're very good. So they interviewed someone from that. She was excellent. And they also interviewed Gillian Mackay, isn't it, the Green MSP, who's been leading the push for buffer zones. And Martin Geisler interviewed her. He was very good, actually. He was quite challenging to her. And he said, well, these people, individuals, they think that there's a human life at stake, basically. And so they're really concerned to give the woman the last opportunity to reconsider. That's what they think is really important. And he put it to the Green MSP, and she said, everyone's got a right to healthcare. What you never, ever, ever hear in these discussions is you never hear someone coming back and saying, well, I don't think human life matters, or it's not a human life, or it only becomes a human life if it's wanted, or it's only valuable if it's wanted, or it only becomes human at 24 weeks or something. Whatever. In other words, responding to the point made, you never, ever hear that in an abortion debate. Just notice from now on, when you see anything in the media, the pro-lifers are saying this is human life is valuable. And the pro-abortion people, they never come back and say either, no, human life is not valuable, or it's not human life. They don't want to go there because they know the debate's lost there. They immediately go to, you've got a right to healthcare. The United Nations says such and such a thing, or whatever. My body, my choice. They will not engage with the pro-life argument. But, well, let's see what happens in the years to come. Right, how are we doing? People have got the right to complain. They have the right to hold a rally living in a totalitarian state. Yeah, indeed. If you're going to hold some sort of demonstration, if you're objecting to nuclear weapons, where'd you go? I mean, you go to Fastlane. If you're objecting to them, I don't know, cutting some trees down to make a new motorway, where'd you go? You go and, stand in the middle of those trees or whatever. And if you're objecting to abortion, where you go to the place where it's been performed. Now, of course, nowadays, a majority of abortions are telemedicine, as they call it, where you just get the pills by post. Women take them at home and sort of have the abortion at home. Okay, I mean, that's the usual. So being outside the clinic, that's not actually where most people go for an abortion. But I'm inclined to think, if buffer zones come in, or even if they don't, where do these pills come from? Who processes them? Who delivers them? Who makes them? In other words, maybe we could project baby poison factory onto the side. Oh, let's just see. That's something to look into. If any of you know anything about that, I would be fascinated to know. Right, cool. I was just wondering, is they're normally seen as a Christian party, right? Who are you talking about? I'm not sure which party you're talking about. If you just let us know, and I'll be interested to reply to that one. Glasgow, 7 p.m. tomorrow night. That's outside Education Scotland. 58 Robertson Street. 58 Robertson Street, 7 p.m. That's our protest. Bring a teddy. That's a protest about sex education, sexuality, gender education, or indoctrination. Right. Moving on. Right. Talking about Glasgow. Had a letter from the legal department of Glasgow City Council the other week. Now, I think when you get a letter from a legal department, you're supposed to quake in your boots and be a bit worried about it. But I'll read you this. See what you think about it. So there we've got that nice Glasgow coat of arms there. I act on behalf of Glasgow City Council. It has been brought to my attention that you have recently posted a video on YouTube and on Twitter relating to the curriculum at Castleton Primary School. This was the one where they've got all the LGBT content in every subject, usual sort of stuff. Whilst we appreciate that the faces of some of the children featured in your video have been blurred, the faces of children are clearly visible in the background of one shot in particular. So I did blur out the faces, which, to be honest, is a bit of a joke, isn't it? The school tweets them out, the photographs of them, And then I just reproduce them, and they say, "Oh, you can't have that child's face showing," which is a bit of a nonsense considering the school that published it. But I had already blurred them. They reckoned a couple of the children in the background could still be identified. I don't think they could. The photos were very low quality. The images were tiny in the background. But anyway, I blurred them out a bit more on YouTube. So whatever. This is inappropriate and unacceptable. I would ask you to immediately remove this video from YouTube and Twitter. Well, no, I won't, and I didn't. Now, failure to do so will result in my clients, that's the council, giving consideration to taking further action. Okay, consider away. I understand Glasgow City Council digital team have already reported your tweet and YouTube video to the relevant platform hosts, but I've been asked to make contact with you directly in order that a more immediate action can be taken on your behalf. Yeah, YouTube sent me an email saying, could you blur out some more faces? And they gave me the time, so I just did that. That was fine. They obviously didn't realize it had gone on Facebook as well. You'd think they'd have their nous to check that, wouldn't you? All the social media platforms. Anyway, yours faithfully, legal manager. So that was that. So I replied, thus, dear Mr. Cormack, thank you for your letter of 1st of June 2022, which I received on the 11th of June. You are correct that children's faces were blurred in our video about LGBT indoctrination at Castleton Primary School. We need not agree whether the children visible in the background of the very low resolution images were recognizable, but additional blurring has now been added. If the council is so concerned about children being seen in such images, may I suggest that schools be instructed not to post such images on social media, particularly where children are being subjected to controversial political indoctrination and being used to advance adult agendas. Can you please clarify, is Glasgow City Council happy that the obscene artwork by recommended artist Keith Haring remain unblurred in my video? Right, in conclusion, may I invite an intelligent and principled response to my criticisms? Is there anyone in the council or school who would be willing to discuss these issues and defend the council's position publicly? Or would they prefer to avoid genuine debate and instead hide away, leaving the legal department to nitpick over trivialities? Meanwhile, a generation of children have been inducted into a destructive ideology that will in many cases blight them for the rest of their lives. When people whose lives have been ravaged by transgender ideology look back in anger at their miseducation, it won't be much defence to say that you tried to get a couple of faces pixelated in the background of a Scottish family party video. Yours faithfully, Richard Lucas. Now, my letter there invited debate, which obviously I'm wasting my ink in my printer, aren't I? It's obviously never going to happen. But the reason I do that is just to make the point. But isn't that so classic? Like I was saying about Ian Blackford, they're saying, Patrick Grady, this is what he did. Should he be an MP? They don't answer the question. You just talk about procedure. Same here. We make a really serious criticism about the education in indoctrination in a primary school in Glasgow. And how do they reply? Do they defend it? Do they debate? No. They just find something to nitpick over, some little technicality, some little thing where they think you've got you on some little detail. It's very frustrating. Just like when we went to the launch of the rshp.scot sex education resources. It was at the, the Scottish Learning Festival. So I went to the presentation. At the end of the presentation, the staff who'd produced the disgusting resources, they all posed for a photograph. And I took a photograph of them while they were posing for a photograph. Then later on in the day, I was walking down a corridor and a lady came up to me and said, "You took my picture." I said, "Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." She said, "You took my picture without permission." I thought, what is she on about? I mean, what does she think I've done? Does she think I was like sneaking into the ladies' toilets or something? I was just completely confused. I said, "Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." She said, "In that session, you took my picture." Then I said, when you were posing for a picture, I took your picture then? Yes. You haven't got permission to use my picture. And there was another woman saying the same thing. So the sex education resources, I criticize them on a whole range of substantial issues. And they come back, they don't say, right, could we discuss this? We think you're wrong about this. We object to what you've said here. You need to correct that. None of that. It's just, you didn't have permission to take my picture. It's the same sort of mindset. Like, debate doesn't even enter into their thoughts at all. You've just got to try and get them on something, because they're sure the law's on their side about something. So yeah, so that's Glasgow City Council. That's the last we'll hear of them about that. Trained blank and direct question. Yes, absolutely. I find it so frustrating. The more they mention the school, the more people will know the coercion of innocent minds that's been. Yes, yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. Right, say, I'm in the family party. I intended to ask if you had to be religious to be pro-life, and if someone had to be a Christian during the party. Right, let's take those in reverse order. Certainly don't need to be a Christian during the party. We have many members who are not Christians. We have, not a huge number, we do have some members of other religions as well. We've got a couple of Muslims and people of other faiths, but lots of people with no faith at all. We've certainly got Protestants, Catholics, yeah, all sorts of types of Christians as well. People tend to think we're a Christian party because our policies do reflect the moral teachings of Christianity in a lot of ways, but they also reflect the moral teachings of Islam as well. And basically, most world religions, because they generally agree on these core moral issues. So it tends to reflect those values. But because there's more Christians than anything else in Scotland, people tend to assume that that's a Christian point of view. No, we're very definitely open to anyone. Do you have to be religious to be pro-life? I'm very glad you asked that question, Cole, because that comes up quite often. And I discovered a website today. I tweeted about it, actually. So if you're interested in finding it, go to our Twitter account and you'll see it. I think it was today. It might have been yesterday. But a website of a group called, what was it called? I think it was called Secular Pro-Life or something. And their strapline is, you don't have to be religious to think that killing unborn children is wrong. Or you don't have to be religious to value all human life or something. So great. And it is genuine. It's not like a front for a Christian group trying to pretend it's secular. I mean, it's a big organization. Their website is very, very good. So there are pro-life people who are not Christians. And I think more and more people are becoming pro-life. And I'll tell you, there's two reasons why, actually. One reason is people are hearing the arguments. Because you could live in Britain. You could even follow politics and the media quite closely for decades and never hear the pro-life argument. So there's a lot of people in that camp. They're waiting to be convinced once they hear the argument. They just haven't heard it yet. So that's good news for us. And the other factor, I think, which you may think is a bit more of a dubious factor, but it's real in any case, I'll talk about it, and that is polarization. People talk a lot about polarization in politics, and it's very, very true, especially in America, but it's happening here to some degree as well. Now, what happens in polarization is politics tends to go to two camps, and people think they're either in this one or they're in this one, and it becomes quite clear-cut, and the middle tends to thin out, if you like. Less people see themselves in the middle. People tend to be in one camp or the other. Now, if, say, you're in America and you're in the Republican camp, which would be, the sort of conservative values camp, you would look at that and you think, right, who are all the people who are pro-abortion? You look at them all and think, they're the people who I disagree with on every other issue. They're the people who really irritate me, and I just don't have any respect for them. I think they get every issue under the sun wrong. So it comes to this one. So the people who are saying abortion's okay are the people I think are wrong about everything. The people who are saying abortion's not right, they're the people I generally agree with. So they're going to be more open to thinking, well, yeah, actually, I see their point. I disagree with it as well. And I think a similar effect is happening in Scotland as well. I'm coming across people who are not religious at all, and they're saying previously they hadn't really had any opinion on the abortion issue, but recently they've started to look into it, and they've come down on the side that agrees with their general alignment, because they're generally like conservative-minded people. By conservative-minded, I don't mean like the Conservative Party. I mean, that should be some violation of the Trade Descriptions Act. I mean, people with, socially conservative values. So as politics polarizes, I think more and more people are going to have to decide where they're going to fall on this issue. And I think a lot of people are going to realize that actually their natural inclinations, their natural allies are pro-lifers. So I think that is going to be a positive thing over the next few years. Right, let's see if we've got some more comments there. I put that on because I was intrigued. Right, you're gonna have to explain that one, Dominic. Yeah, don't quite get that one. Good news in America certainly is. It certainly is. Right. Okay, right, let's move on to another issue. How are we doing? Time is flying, as it always does. Right, let me just take that comment down. Right. Drugs. Now, the Scottish Family Party's got a drugs policy. Our drugs policy, yeah, it's pretty socially conservative, so it's sort of abstinence-based policy. So we're not keen on decriminalising drugs. Now, there's quite a variety of views about that. It's one of those issues where it's not unusual for someone who's very much on board with us in general might take a different view on that issue. And it's not something I've really looked into a huge amount. So one of my jobs over this summer is to do some serious reading on the issue of drugs. I've got various questions in my mind I want to answer. I'll tell you one of them is this. I think it's wrong for someone to take a dangerous addictive drug because they just think it will give them a pleasurable experience. Even if it's not addictive, I still think there's something wrong with that. And yet, if someone goes bungee jumping, does something deliberately dangerous because they'll enjoy it, I think that's okay. And I haven't quite clarified in my mind why it is, or if it is justifiable for me to take a different view to pleasure attained through drug taking, as opposed to doing other dangerous or unhealthy activities. Now, that's my intuition. I might end up thinking I can't justify it, but if that's what my conscience says, then who am I to argue with my conscience? But that's another issue, another path we could go down. But it might be that I'll reconsider that. I don't know. But I've been reading this book. Where are we? Drugs Without the Hot Air. And it's written by someone who's very much a liberalizer. He thinks all drugs should be liberalized, harm reduction philosophy. So I basically disagree with him, but I thought I'd read the book, give him a hearing, and see what he's got to say. It's very interesting. Actually, I'll tell you a little bit about this section here. It's talking about the harms done by drugs. And he was saying there's lots of harms. For a start, the drug can kill you. Okay, can poison you. Overdose type thing. Drug-related mortality, that's where the drug hasn't directly killed you, but it's caused another health problem that has killed you. So like if you smoke, it's not the nicotine that kills you, but the smoking can produce lung cancer, so it could kill you in a different way. Drug-specific harm, that's where the drug that injures you, causes an illness or whatever. Drug-related harm, that could be, including things like accidents, injuries, that sort of thing. Dependence, so addiction, another sort of harm. Drug-specific impairment of mental functioning. For example, someone takes cannabis, and that can lead to psychological problems. Drug-related impairment of mental functioning. That's where it's not directly caused by the drug, but it's something that's triggered by it in some way. Loss of job, income, possessions, house, etc. Loss of relationships. So they're all things that can affect the drug user. But then I was very pleased to see he went on to harms to others. Injuries to other people, like through accidents, aggressive behavior, crime, the associated costs of that, economic cost, healthcare, policing, rehabilitation services, etc. Impact on family life. That also can produce a cost to the state as well if there have to be benefits paid. International damage, in other words, the drugs bought in one country, what effect does that have in the countries where they are produced? Environmental damage. Okay, didn't say that's a particularly issue towards the top of the agenda, but are they produced in an environmentally friendly way? Decline in reputation of a community. I thought that's a very relevant issue as well. If an area gets renowned as an area with a lot of drug addicts, it's not somewhere you want to live. So it tends to be on a downward spiral. A couple that missed out, I thought, were progression. So if someone uses a drug, does it increase the risk or probability of someone going to a stronger drug or a different type of drug? So that was a very important one that he missed out. And the other one I think he missed out was culture. Is if drug taking becomes more widespread, does that result in more people taking drugs? I would say it's blatantly obvious that it does, but he didn't talk about that. So basically there, I thought, right, I'm on side with this fella. He's really taken a broad view of the harms caused by drugs. He hasn't just said it's about the individual. He's looking at the wider consequences for society. So what's his name? David Nutt. I thought, right, I'm on your side here. I'm on your wavelength. I'm liking this. Then I've read half the book, and he doesn't talk at all about the harms to others. He only talks about the harms to the drug user. That's quite interesting. So he only looks at the harm to the drug user, and then he's arguing on the basis of that there should be, methadone injection, state injection facilities, decriminalization, etc. So it seems pretty apparent to me the error in his thinking, and that he lays out harms to users, harms to others, then he completely forgets about the harms to others and comes to the conclusion that drugs should be decriminalized. So very interesting so far. Couple more points from it. It basically says, well, it says some people, if they take a drug, it's virtually inevitable they will become an addict. It's just their personality type, it's their genetic makeup, it's their social scenario. Virtually inevitable they'll become a drug addict, and in many cases it's inevitable that will always be a problem for them. That will always be a pull towards taking that drug again. In other words, the moment they've taken that drug, he's not quite saying they're doomed, but he's saying, the prospects are extremely bleak. Which left me thinking, well, surely the only way of avoiding this absolute human disaster is to stop the person taking it in the first place by making sure the drug isn't available. But he doesn't seem to get that. He just seems to have the view that it's just inevitable. This person is going to become a drug addict. There's nothing we can do about that. So we have to look at how to help them. So again, I think he's missed a key point there. Another thing as well is Portugal. You often hear with drugs, what about Portugal? They've decriminalized and it's going really well there. Their drug deaths have plummeted. They have technically decriminalized drugs, but that doesn't mean if you get caught with drugs that nothing happens. The police are still involved. It's just you have to enter into a rehabilitation program or an education program. So, they're still policed quite sternly, and, there's compulsory action taken. It's just not classed as criminality. It's through a parallel system. If someone repeatedly refuses that system, then, it does become a criminal thing. Right? Do I oppose that? Not necessarily. But in Britain, it tends to be presented, you see, they've decriminalized it. Anything goes in Portugal, and it works out really well. Therefore, we should allow everything as well. Not that simple. Not that simple. One last comment on the drugs issue, then I'll come at the some of the comments. The last thing, I was listening to Any Questions at the Radio 4 program, on Saturday, and someone from Scotland phoned up. They were talking about the appalling drugs death statistics in Scotland, which are like miles ahead of any other country in Europe. And the gentleman phoning in said the Scottish government funded the film Trainspotting 2 with, I think he said, £50 million. They funded Trainspotting 2, which I've checked up, and it was funded by Creative Scotland, which is a government agency. And he said the film glorifies drug taking. Now, that would say it all, wouldn't it? If the government is funding a film that glorifies drug taking, at the same time trying to tackle the appalling death toll of drug taking, then there's something pretty dramatically wrong, isn't there? But that would be absolutely typical of the Scottish government. So I was in a HMV, an ocean terminal in Edinburgh the other day, and happened to see Trainspotting 2 sitting there £1.99 in the bargain basket. So I bought it. I will subject myself to the unpleasant experience of watching the thing, and I will report back whether or not the Scottish government did indeed fund a film that glorifies drug taking. And if they did, I will let you know about it. Right, let's have a look. So the biggest users of drugs are respectable jobs, lawyers, teachers, doctors. Yes, they are. Yeah. It's interesting with drug taking. There's often a phase where you get people who've sort of got it under control, keeping their life together. And they're the people who can be really snide about people who are uptight about drug taking. You're so old fashioned. Can you not just, it doesn't do any harm. It's all fine. That's the mess you get for a while. Then it all goes wrong, and then there's so much stigma about being a drug addict. The rehabilitation service is really inadequate. It's really bad. I've got my rights. So it completely flips like that. But you're right. There are a lot of people in responsible positions who have a phase, at least, of drug taking. Yes, of course, if we decriminalize, that doesn't mean there are less addicts, just no action taken against them. Well, they do say that the drug death statistics have gone down, which might be for any variety of issues. But in Portugal, they've really made an effort to deal with it, though, in terms of tackling supply and in terms with tackling users as well. The fact that it's not called, criminal justice system, they're still making a big effort to find users and put them through their re-education, rehabilitation system. So they are working pretty hard to tackle the issue as well. They're not sitting back and assuming it will look after itself. Yes, a good attempt to be honest with yourself is good. Right, I think that's probably in reply to me reading the book of someone who disagrees. I would always recommend that. If ever you're thinking about taking an unorthodox view on something, I would always recommend get a book of the mainstream view and read the whole thing, okay, just to make sure you fully understand the mainstream view before you start considering alternative views. Really, really important. If you just listen to one side online, then you're not necessarily building up a very complete picture of what's going on. Some want a society of people made docile and complicit by drugs. That's Brave New World, isn't it? That's the Brave New World scenario, Aldous Huxley's dystopian novel. The people had to take their soma to keep them just compliant and willing to go about their business. I wouldn't ascribe those motives to any government that I'm aware of, to be honest. I think it's more that it seems, particularly on the left of the politics, there's something about the idea that drug taking, it's not that it's cool, but it's somehow you're being right wing if you want to clamp down on it or stop it. You've got to allow people to do it. It's fine for people to be experimenting, to be taking illegal drugs. We just have to picture them when they become addicts. So it's a demoralizing position. Instead of saying this is irresponsible, it's a bad thing to do, you shouldn't do it, the people with a more left-wing view tend to say, no, that's really bad. That just makes it worse. You shouldn't say that. What you should say is, well, some people are going to take drugs. Okay, that's fine. That's up to them. But then when they do take them, we've just got to help them to try and pick up the pieces. Whereas the more conservative approach is to emphasize, just don't do this. Don't go down this road. Let's try and make sure drugs are not available. And even if they are available, let's encourage people to not take them, so we don't get into the problem. Let's try, instead of just focusing on reducing the harm, let's try to eliminate the harm. Now, of course, you can try and do both at once, which I think is what happens in Britain in general, in theory. But the emphasis in Scotland is very much moving over to the harm reduction rather than the harm prevention point of view. Addiction to drugs affects the whole family. Absolutely. That's the sort of thing that's missed out in the more liberal approach. Oh, let people try it. If they end up an addict, well, we'll provide good rehabilitation facilities. We'll try and help them. What happens to the family during all this? Devastation in other people's lives. But they tend to just see it as a personal issue, but it's not. Right, let's just say goodbye to our one of our regular sort of anti-Semitic commenters. Right, bye to him. Okay, right, a couple more issues just to talk about. Marriage and fertility. These two issues, they just seem to be getting more and more of a mention in the mainstream-ish media. People talking about marriage and its benefits, we just hear a little bit more maybe than we did a few years ago. But fertility rates, that really does seem to be becoming a mainstream political issue. Now, the governments are already aware of it. They've already got strategies. Like the Scottish government wants to have more fertility treatments for single women to boost the population, like produce more fatherless children. Not a great plan, SNP. But in general, it's becoming an issue, and people are starting to talk about what policies encourage people to have more children. And the answer you normally get in the mainstream is cheaper childcare. This is based on the false assumption that most mums would rather be working more, and if they could just be sure they could work more and someone else would look after the kids, they'd have kids. Where it's actually the opposite. Most mums would prefer to be with their kids more. So if you want families to have more children, the policy that would be most effective in encouraging that is if mums in particular thought, right, if I have another kid, I can afford to stay at home and look after it. And if husband's working, we'll be fine. We can sustain that. And our policy to enable that is the transferable tax allowance. But the general discussion doesn't go into that. It's always, we need cheaper childcare. That's always the thing that will lead to higher fertility rates. Maybe it would have an impact, but it's not the main way. And it doesn't reflect the desires of most women, considering having children. So, yeah, that is an interesting one. Pharmaceutical industry also gets a lot of people hooked on drugs, although they're legal. Yes, that is true. That is absolutely true. That's a complex issue. People who get addicted to prescription drugs, and some drugs like methadone, the heroin substitute, are provided on the NHS, and they cause a lot of problems. The fact that the methadone was provided on the NHS doesn't stop you being a terrible neighbour, an irresponsible driver, etc. So that is a problem. Yep, drugs do in many cases lead to mental health issues, and that's a really serious thing. Cannabis, in particular, and the mental health effects, particularly when people take it up young, are very concerning. But I still think, if you're the Green Party, if you're the SNP, Labour even, maybe even the Conservatives, do they not think so many people smoke cannabis? Are we going to lose votes if we take too hard a line on it? It's something like 1 in 7 people now in Britain, I think, currently are taking cannabis. I think that might be the statistic I heard. So that's the sort of level when politicians start thinking, we don't want to upset those people too much. So let's sacrifice the mental health of our young people in order to just keep these people on board. Right, let's just block that person again. The India F plan, I've talked about that already, Jupiter. So if you want to rewatch at the end, go back to the beginning, and had a good chat about that. Right, one last thing to mention. Before I mention that, just to say again, 7 o'clock tomorrow night in Glasgow, 58 Robinson Street, Education Scotland buildings. We're having a protest about sex education, etc. 7 o'clock tomorrow night, 58 Robinson Street, Glasgow. Bring a teddy if you can, not compulsory, but bring a teddy as a symbol of childhood innocence. It'd be great to see a good crowd, and I think we're going to have a good crowd. Let's see. And Thursday, 2 o'clock, in front of the Scottish Parliament, we're going to have a little pro-life gathering. Let's say a little, I don't know, a handful of us. Well, let's see. Who knows how many people will be there. But we'll have our new pro-life flags and a few placards. We'll just make our presence felt in the face of the overt hostility to the pro-life view that's been provoked in the last week. Right, last thing I was going to talk about. Edinburgh Pride was on Saturday, and I watched the video of the politicians addressing the masses in front of the Scottish Parliament from the top of an open-top bus. So we had a Green MSP, we had Alex Cole-Hamilton, leader of the Lib Dems, we had Christine McKelvey, SNP minister, we had a Conservative councillor, a Labour MSP. So they all spoke to the crowds. Now I'm going to make a video about it, about some of the things that they said, some of the things that were going on. I mean, for example, when the Conservative was addressing the crowd just chanted Tory scum at him all the way through. It was a bit of a sad spectacle. It was like the Conservatives so desperate to be in with the cool gang, but they don't want them, but they're just so determined. Determined in any case. I mean, some of the other things, they generally brought in whatever political issues they liked. Alex Cole-Hamilton had to go at Boris Johnson. I'm no defender of Boris Johnson. But is that what the Pride event's for? Is this not funded by the government? It's not funded by the council? Certainly indirectly funded by the government, but it's just a political rally. A couple of speakers said, we're on the side of the RMT union. What's that got to do with pride? Abortion, of course. They were absolutely pro-abortion. It's terrible what's happened in America. Way cheer, cheer, cheer. You can see this is a political rally. It's a political rally, absolutely plain and simple. Now, the really key point, though, I wanted to mention was at the end of the speeches, they had a minute's silence to remember people who died. Now, that was a bit odd, really. Who has died in particular? They said people who died of COVID or died of AIDS or whatever. So it's a bit strange why they thought they're having this minute's silence. But anyway, they had a minute's silence. Now, if you're having a minute's silence in an organization, who do you get to administer the minute's silence, to introduce the minute's silence? That's something where you'd maybe get the chaplain, wouldn't you, to do that? If you're in a school, maybe you get a chaplain to do that. But they got their chaplain, if you like, their unofficial chaplain. Guess who that chaplain is? A representative of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. Okay, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. Now, if you're not familiar with them, these are the mainly men who dress up as nuns and go to gay pride events. The idea of dressing up in nuns is that they're mocking nuns, mocking the Catholic Church, mocking the concept of sexual purity, mocking the sexual purity of nuns, and instead they're the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, perpetual sexual indulgence, also known as sex addiction or perversion, call it what you like. I've made a video previously of the activities of these people, and I'm not using this word flippantly, but if you look at the activity of these people, well, they're perverts, quite a few of them. I mean, having their condom tasting sessions in a public park with children walking past. I mean, their morals are in the gutter, and their whole raison d'etre, I say, is to mock, in particular, the Catholic Church and to promote wild sexual promiscuity and to mock conventional sexual morality. They are the people that were acting, if you like, as the chaplains to Edinburgh Pride. So we had a representative of the Green Party, the SNP, Labour, Conservative, and Lib Dems, all the Holyrood parties there, all happy to be participating in this event, chaplained by, if you like, overseen by, concluded by the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. I mean, what is going on? What is going on? Might we have even imagined? Maybe the Conservative councillor might have said, Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, that's a bit much for me. I'm all for gay rights. I think he was probably gay himself. But, let's draw the line somewhere, shall we? This is a bit distasteful. It's a bit offensive. It's not a great message we're delivering here. I mean, other speakers said, it's great to have children here. Introducing children to the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. This is in front of the Parliament. This is our political parties in action. Now, was I appalled? I mean, would you be shocked by anything anymore? I really don't know. But it really brings home to you where the morals of our nation are, where the morals of our Parliament are. Absolutely in the gutter. Where as I say, I don't use this word flippantly, perverts, promoters of sexual immorality, mockers of sexual purity, where those people are given a platform and honoured in front of the Scottish Parliament by representatives of every party. You probably get the impression I wasn't really impressed by that. But keep an eye open for my video. I'm going to put out a video to show you some other aspects of it as well, which I think you'll find very interesting. What I'm going to do in my video, I'm going to make this video as though I've got no problem with homosexual relationships. I've got no problem with transgender identities. I do have particular views about those. But what I'm going to say is, even if I didn't, even if you're absolutely okay with those things, you don't have any objection to them at all, there's still a whole lot that you could see as wrong with the speeches from the top of the bus at the end of the Pride March in Edinburgh. So keep your eye open for that video, and I hope you find that interesting. I mean, shameful. Yeah, I mean, that word didn't come to mind. That's a perfect word to use, a perfect word. I'm not a Catholic. I often find myself speaking about the Catholic Church because it's clear in its teachings. If you're a Catholic, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon's had a photograph taken with the arm round the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. So they're mocking and ridiculing your faith, and yet people keep voting for them. It's staggering. It's staggering, but that is what happens. Right. So just a reminder then. So Glasgow tomorrow night, 7 p.m., 58 Robertson Street. It'd be great to see you. Or in Edinburgh, 2 p.m. in front of the Parliament. It would be lovely to see you then. We've got another couple of events coming up, special events coming up. I won't mention those now. But in July, we've got a special pro-life event where we are involved in supporting, cooperating with whatever, CBR, which is a pro-life organization. And they show images in the street. They take out placards, large placards, displays showing the developing baby at different stages in the womb, and also possibly showing pictures of aborted babies as well. And what they do is take those to show people the truth of abortion. Now, some people are going to be involved in that. We'll see how that goes. So that's not a family party thing, but we're going to offer people the opportunity to take part in that if they would like to. If that's something you think that's not a form of pro-life activism you agree with, okay, that's fine. That's something not for you. But I say it's not a family party thing, but it's just something that is going to be taking place in Edinburgh. And the other thing coming up, as you might remember, Matthew Grech, who was on the live stream. Matthew is the Maltese ex-gay X Factor contestant. Remember him? He was on the live stream. It was excellent. Lots of people watched the live stream. He is actually coming to Edinburgh in July, later on in July. So there'll be a chance to meet him and hear his story. Remember, he was an X Factor contestant in Malta. He spoke about his journey away from homosexuality, and he was therefore kicked off the show. He's up in Edinburgh, and he's in Britain because the day after he's getting married to a woman, obviously, which will be obviously a huge landmark, as it is for anyone, but for him in particular, in his journey away from his previous homosexual attractions as well. So there'll be a chance to meet Matthew Grech. So keep your eye open for that. Right, thanks very much for the comments. It was nice to be able to engage with quite a few of them since we didn't have a guest. And see you next week. Good night.